What up, Z fam? It's your boy Z Dog MD. I'm live and direct out of Z office. Hey, check it out. We're pretty excited about the we're pretty excited about the silly piece we did today about Larry Nassar, the U.S. gymnast doctor who was convicted of sexual assault basically on multiple patients over years. So definitely, if you haven't seen that, check it out. Although by the end of this show today, I want to talk a little bit more, get a little more into detail on that, because we put it out to be kind of snappy and kind of funny, but I didn't get a chance to really dig into it as much as I'd like. But first, I want to talk, and I'm going to load up your comments right now. I want to talk about this case of a mommy doc, a pediatrician in New York, who is an obesity expert, who does a lot of medical correspondence stuff on TV, some local to New York, some national. She is, by all accounts, a fantastic doc and a fantastic mother named Dr. Dyan Hes. And I had the pleasure of just speaking with her on the phone out of New York, where it's later. And I got to chat with her kids too. They were running around. Apparently they're fans of Doc Vader. Who knew? So in any event, Dr. Hes was asked to come on an NBC segment. They actually, they called her like at the last minute. And this is what TV does. They'll just be like, hey, come on right now. Can we come right now? And they did this about a piece they were doing on chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Not just concussions, but just any kind of head bonk, head injuries that, particularly in children, have such long-term consequences in terms of permanent injury, debility, etc. So there's a study out of Boston. Dr. Lee Goldstein was the principal investigator talking about this. So they reached out to her and said, you're a doctor and a mother. We want to come to your house, talk to you about your kids and about your medical opinions on this stuff. So she's rounding in the hospital, okay? She's got a couple patients in the hospital. And again, this is all from her directly. I just spoke with her. Wonderful, wonderful. I want to have her on the show legit next time she's in Vegas. Let's just say that. So we had a great conversation. In any event, she's rounding. She finishes up. She rushes home because she thinks it's important to educate the public about the dangers of things like tackle football and getting head injuries. And her son actually plays some sports, and so they came to her house, the reporter, the camera guy. She made them coffee, spent an hour going through sort of medical questions about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the Boston study, etc. So a lot of medical stuff and some personal stuff about her son and football, and they wanted to get B-roll, so they had her walk around. B-roll means this sort of background footage that they use to cut in for a piece. And, if you've ever done TV, I hate it, by the way. I hate it, and I'll tell you why in a second. They do this kind of thing to create this sort of finished product that the editor puts together and the producer oversees and all of that. So NBC was kind of planning this out. So they get a bunch of B-roll of her like puttering around the kitchen, washing dishes, and doing motherly things. Well, the thing gets edited. The hour of her life is gone. She's hoping that this is going to have an impact. She sees the final product, which I shared on my page late last night. And it shows her, it identifies her as Dyan Hes, no doctor, no credentials, no nothing. All the stuff that was medical, they edited it out, and they used her purely as a concerned mother with a son who plays sports. To add insult to injury, Lee Goldstein, who was the principal investigator on the Boston study, they show a clip of him with his beard and his manliness and his older age and all of that, and they put him up as the medical expert. Well, I can see the angry faces coming through. You can imagine when she saw this, she thought, wait, what? And she tried to reach out to NBC to say, this is, as one comment says, shameful. You wasted my time. You could have gotten any mother of a kid who has sports injury. You misled me to think that I was using my medical expertise, which, by the way, I have done for multiple other shows. This is something that I've done before because I care about it. Well, no. You're just mom, not otherwise specified. And no credit to being a doctor, none of that. Now, as if women physicians don't already face stigma and worse in the healthcare environment. This was sort of the final thing. So she tries to reach them. She can't. So she's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell my homies over at the Physician Moms Group, PMG. It's a closed group on Facebook where about almost 70,000, if not exactly 70,000 moms who are also doctors come together to talk about stuff that matters to them. It's a group where they can vent about stuff that they find it very hard to do in a public forum, especially when they're doctors, and you get a lot of weird stalkers and crazy stuff. But also they have a tribe of people who kind of understands what they're about. And believe me, I've run afoul of them before, and it is not pretty when that happens. They are a powerful, very sort of important force on Facebook, I think for good, in the space. So she goes to them and says, hey, oh, by the way, Hala, their founder, has been on our show a couple times, and she's fantastic, and I love everything she's doing. So she goes to them and says, oh, this is what happened. And, oh, do you think that the women in this group, who are all doctors and mothers, didn't immediately go, what the F is going on? Like, oh yeah, this was like the time that this happened to me, or this time that they asked me to get coffee for the male doc, or this time that this or that or the other thing happened. It's every single day. Forget me too. It's like me 12, right? You don't think that they messaged and emailed and swarmed on NBC's page to the point where the reporter and the folks at NBC called up Dr. Dyan Hes and berated her. And this is from her, obviously I'm hearing her side of the story, but she's a fellow physician, and there's no reason not to believe what she's saying because this sounds plausible. They berated her. They said, what did you do on social media? You need to tell these people to stop, okay? We wanted a mom, and that's why we interviewed you. Oh, really? So that's why you asked me about brain plasticity? And that's why you asked me about what I tell my patients, and you interviewed me for an hour in my home where I came home from work early to accommodate you so I could get the message out that I wanted, which was I'm a mother and a doctor. Because guess what? You can do both of those things. Just like you can be a mother and a nurse, or a mother and a respiratory therapist, or a mother who stays at home and takes care of kids. You can do all of those things. NBC, do you know what NBC told her? They said, oh, we never promised you that. We went back to our journalistic standards, and we found out that, you as far as sources and the rules around what sources are, you can't be both a mother and a doctor. That's what they told her on the phone. That's what they told her on the phone. And of course, she's like, getting agitated on the phone to the point where her husband's like, hey, you're yelling. And she's like, you're damn right I'm yelling. They wasted my time. And believe me, guys, like this has happened to me occasionally, obviously not being a woman, but the press has wasted my time. They've spent long times interviewing me and they edited it into a crappy little clip. We're kind of used to that in the press. But this was beyond shameless because not only does it reflect a bias, right, that women can't do all these things, it's a lie that you can't be a woman and a mother and be a source, because that's what gave the story its oomph. What would have made that story good is here's a mom and a doctor. Well, as mothers, right, wouldn't you want to know what a mommy doc thinks, what they would do for their own kid? And it turns out Dyan Hes has talked about, yes, you should vaccinate. And yes, you should, she talks about obesity. And she says, yeah, every now and again, I let my kids eat junk food. That's part of being a mom. But here's the thing about how you manage obesity. This is someone who does this on the daily, and they don't want to actually take her knowledge and use it for a story where it's perfectly applied in conjunction with her male colleague who did the Boston study, Lee Goldstein, in conjunction with others. You can get anyone who is a mom, who is a kid, who does sports. So, of course, I posted it on our page, and it generated a lot of comments. And I think almost all of them are basically saying, this is pretty shameless, right? And this is the same press that will latch on to any kind of sexual bias anywhere else, but then they go and show the exact same thing, right? And this is a female reporter. I don't know who the producer was, but ultimately it's the producer's decision. And there's some other stuff that I'm not telling you that I don't think it's appropriate to say, but there's other parts of the story that make it even more egregious. So what do you guys think? Let's read some comments. Let's see. Isn't that all NBC does, period? Edit the news? Kalina Skillenstad? Well, that's... And look. I want to preface this by saying I'm not attacking a free press. I think a free press is crucial to our democracy. I'm just saying if you're going to be a journalist, do a good job, okay? It's not... It's hard. It's hard today when you're trying to get ratings. They would have gotten better ratings if they had said she was a doctor and a mother. Period. It's just not a good... It's just sloppy AF. And it's shameful and it's insulting to a professional who happens to be a woman and a mother. You know, I ran this by Mrs. Dog because she's always pretty circumspect about stuff like this, and she was like, "Nah, that's just effing BS. That's insulting. It's insulting on every level. It's a cut and dry." Because I'm like, "What? Am I missing something here? Like, was there some reason they should have done this?" No, there's none. It's a novel concept, says Jessica Evans. You can menstruate and practice medicine. Jessica, it's not that novel. I've been menstruating for years and practicing medicine. Let's see. The usual political comments. Berated her. Oh, it just gets worse. Oh, yeah. Oh, and, you know, Stephanie Thurman, they were so butthurt that all the physician moms would gang up on them. What a perfect use of social media to shame the media when they deserve it, right? And we've done that before, Z-Pack. We shamed Inside Edition when they gave Dog the Bounty Hunter a platform to say, I would, if that doctor doesn't cure my wife of her cancer, he's going to die, basically. And we're like, you can't say that. You can't put that on the air because it gives a platform to people who would harm healthcare providers. So here is my takeaway, because I'm not going to mansplain the bias in this, the sex-related bias, because I can't. I'll let it speak for itself. What I will say is this. This is the reason why we in healthcare need this. I'm not talking about me. I'm not talking about my enterprise. I'm talking about social media as a platform to go directly to the people and tell them what's up. NBC can't edit it. CBS can't censor it. Fox can't spin it. The whole thing just is authentic and real. And this is why, Z-Pack, I don't do TV. I've done it a couple times, some local stuff. I've done the doctors a couple times. And after I go back and look at it, I'm always like, I am never doing that again. Because they dumb it down. They turn it into an edited thing to appeal to a particular demographic somewhere in Nowheresville that isn't what we care about. What we care about is spreading truth, authenticity, and knowledge, which is why I encourage you guys to be active on social media. I know a lot of you guys are afraid because you might lose your job and that sort of thing. Well, do your best, obviously, to keep your job, and you can do anonymous things. You can do different things like that, blogs and things like that. But if you're self-employed or your employer is cool, go out and speak your mind, like Dr. Dyan Hes does on television. But she does it both on social media and television. But this is one of the downsides. She told me, we were talking, and she said, I actually prefer going on live TV when I do TV because they can't edit it. You just say, you have a conversation. It's natural, the way you would talk to a patient or a family. That's how it ought to be. Right? But but every time she does a pre-recorded piece, she's deathly afraid they're going to screw it up. And this was a great example. And then she's understandably furious because her time is worth more than that. It's not like they pay you to do these clips, right? So let's read some comments. And then I want to talk a little bit about Larry Nassar, that two-bit clown. I use social media to warn people about medication side effects and to warn them about horrible physicians, Stephanie Gibbs. Fine. That's great. You should absolutely do that. Assuming you're spreading truth and you're not just slandering people. So you want to make sure that, and this is tricky. This is the thing about social media. It's hard to separate out. But honestly, can you really trust NBC to tell you the truth? Can you trust any of the media outlets? I start to wonder. And I'm somebody who's a champion of media and generally believes the press until something happens to you. So when I was in medical school, I've told the story before. A guy ran a red light. He was high on cocaine. It was in San Francisco. Ran through the red light, hit me, then hit a homeless guy and another guy. killed the homeless guy. And of course, I've got PTSD. I watched the news that night to see what happened. They showed a picture of me sitting in the back of a police car because the policeman was driving me home because I had no car, and he was really cool. And they reported, this is the guy who ran the red light and killed the guy and is being alleged manslaughter, and then drove off and came back. And I was like, okay, this is. And that was just a mistake. And I screamed and yelled, and they actually did a retraction on the air. So that's how the press is supposed to fix stuff. But you can see when it doesn't happen, you have no power at all. She couldn't call them, couldn't reach them. When they finally come back, they're berating her. Are you kidding me? It's your job not to screw this up, press. You should apologize, NBC. And she should refuse to ever go on that crap again. Come join me. Be part of the Z-Pack. We'll do this together, Dyan. You and me. And your kids who are dope. I carefully correct family and friends when the old wives' tales are listed. Diana Santafera. Absolutely. I lost my job for sticking up for my patients. It's hard to be an NP and a patient advocate if the doctor does not have some morals. Sarah Heltzel. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I respond to misinformation that's spread on social media. It usually elicits an angry response from someone. Got to keep trying. Catherine Olander. So that's part of the role of this little enterprise is we create a tribe, 800,000 strong. We keep it real and authentic. You call me out when I'm being a scheissehead, and vice versa. Vice versa. All right. Speaking of... Wait, Laura Brosh. Recently, a male doctor got coffee for me. Hell yeah. It was probably me because I love to get coffee for people because it makes me feel good. Plus, I get coffee myself. All right. Larry Nassar. So we did a piece this morning just responding to the LA Times. It was an op-ed. It was an editorial. So it's not the LA Times saying this. It was Jennifer Heffernan was talking about Larry Nassar, the U.S. gymnastics doctor, Michigan State University, doctor of osteopathic medicine, and was basically going through and saying he's not really a doctor because he violated trust. He basically abused these women by doing one of the things that apparently, and they pointed this out in the op-ed, especially early osteopathy sort of promoted, which was different types of manipulation, including intravaginal manipulation. So techniques that manipulate the muscles and the pelvic floor and things like that. And he was doing it without gloves. He was doing it in a clearly inappropriate way. And I don't know if he had chaperones or not, but I'm assuming that he did not. And in the setting of this, he was telling these girls that you need this procedure. People were referring to him in the local community, and I've gotten messages from referring people who were like, I can't believe we referred to this guy. How were we supposed to know? He was doing procedures for pain and other things. And then later, years later, these poor patients are on the stand saying, this is what he did. He was using his entire fist, and he was doing this without gloves, and it was so painful. And then I was performing gymnastics the next day, and it was sore, and all of this. Just horrible, horrible, horrible things that were, some of them were outlined in the op-ed. Now, where the op-ed went off the rails is they started to go back to the origins of osteopathic medicine and osteopathy and kind of really equating it with child abuse and this manipulation as just basically an excuse to abuse people. Is if you read between the lines, that's what the impression was you get from this. And a lot of my osteopathic colleagues sent the article to me and said, can you talk about this? Because this is not what we do. Like, vaginal osteopathic manipulation is a procedure. It's done with consent. It's done under supervision. It's done carefully for very limited circumstances, and it's rarely done. Only, not many people do this. So this guy was clearly using it as an excuse to sexually abuse these patients. So how can you then say all osteopathic physicians kind of fall into this category? And the implication was they're not doctors in this article. Now, I don't know if the author intended this. I didn't research the author because I didn't want to bias myself with whatever her other beliefs are. But the sense I got is that's what you got coming away from the article. So I thought, we had to make a quick video about it. And this morning, Tom and me and Logan just sat down and we quickly shot it, we quickly edited it, and we put it out. And we tried to make it funny, and we put some jokes in it, and we did this and that, and it's there. It's an episode today. I watched it back when I came home, because when you're with the boys and you do the thing, you're like, yeah, that was awesome. Let's put it out. I think it's informative, whatever. And I watch it, and I'm like, it's not informative enough. It's too much clownery. not enough meat. So I want to put a little meat on that skeleton right now. First, I want to read some comments. I live in Michigan, says Sarah Turner, and Nassar is all over our news. It's so sick. We're hearing more and more that all of MSU is having issues with this sexual abuse and assault, even up to the president of MSU. It's so terrible, and the culture there really needs to change, and it's sickening. Okay, that's one piece of meat I wanted to add to the bones. The idea that many people were complicit in this guy's crimes. So he had power, he had a space to abuse these women and patients and girls, and the structures that are there to check and balance doctors, and he is a doctor, was a doctor, right, failed. So the people at Michigan are alleged to have covered for him and gaslighting all of this, and the U.S. gymnastics team, same kind of thing, and that was sort of pushed in the op-ed. That part of the op-ed I felt very strongly was true. We cannot give these people a pass. It needs to be investigated. How could this have been allowed to happen? It has nothing to do with him being an osteopathic physician. It has everything to do with him being a sexual deviant and criminal, which requires treatment and or incarceration, right? In this case, incarceration, because he's been doing criminal activity for years. Where were these people? And now the piper has to be paid, all right? And why? How did this slip through the cracks? What is it about our culture of silence? When we did the review of Fox's The Resident, one of the things I wanted to focus on, apart from the humor and the ridiculousness of it and all the other crap, is the idea that there is a culture of looking the other way when there's a criminally negligent doctor, covering up for colleagues, not saying something. And that's a complicity. And it's ingrained in who we are from residency. You see a crappy attending, it's not like you say anything. That's how you're trained. And then they expect you to like blow the whistle on everyone when you're a grown-up doc. It doesn't happen that way. That's not the culture. That needs to change. So I don't know exactly what happened in Nassar's case, but it's absolutely shameful and unforgivable. And you know, some of the victims have reached out by private message. They don't want to share their stories, but they told me, and it's like, this was absolutely, and now they finally feel like they're not alone because they never knew that this was happening to other people. They felt wrong, but he was telling them it was a procedure. It's criminal. It's unconscionable, right? And it has nothing to do with my osteopathic colleagues. Like, we're all docs, right? So let's read some comments. Not fair to DOs, Gloria Rivera. That's the thing. I think the op-ed person, they should have edited it to not talk about osteopathy as such and just say, well, here's the background of the procedure that he was claiming to do. It's the implication that osteopaths are some kind of sexual predators because they do this manipulation is insane, right? And you can say what you want about manipulation. I will say this. One of our doctors at Turntable was an osteopath, one of the most fantastic doctors I've ever met. The other was a medical doctor, but also did osteopathic manipulation. We had a special room with a table for osteopathic manipulation. We had a female and a male doc, and they did just musculoskeletal stuff, none of this intravaginal rectal stuff that this guy was doing. And it was fantastic. The patients loved it. It was a laying of hands. Whether it was a placebo or whether it was a real effect, it doesn't really matter, because if it kept patients off an extra dose of narcotics or getting on narcotics, it made them feel more connected to their doctor, then why wouldn't you do it, right? It also kept them away from some of the quack chiropractors in Vegas. There are good chiropractors and there are quacks who are anti-vaccine, who try to practice out of their scope, who try to manipulate babies and other stuff like that. And we've talked about this, and I'm going to go on a podcast soon to talk to a more skeptic-minded chiropractor about how we can partner with them to do the stuff that's really within their scope. So that all being said, I think it can be a powerful tool, whether or not it's anything more than a really good placebo. I don't know the answer to that, but I'll say this. Again, if it keeps people off and you're not lying to people, you're not saying I'm manipulating magical chi energy, then... So I got to give a shout out to my osteopathic colleagues. I got to say, screw you, Larry Nassar. By the way, I accidentally called him David Nassar in the piece, and we didn't catch that till I put it out. And I realized somewhere there's a Dr. David Nassar who's a DO who's really pissed. He's like, why am I getting all these death threats? Sorry, it's the Z-Dog effect. I apologize, David Nassar. Larry Nassar, you suck and need to die. Let's see. Comments. We have a local surgeon who botched spinal surgeries for years despite countless complaints and reports by staff. Finally got caught stealing meds and is now gone. But how many people suffered because no one wanted to deal with the mess of a bad doc? Listen to patients and staff and speak up. Lynn Neal. This is the thing. And this is true for nurses. It's true for respiratory therapists. It's true for nurse practitioners. I mean, this is a common thing. No one wants to deal with confronting an incompetent, dangerous, or criminal doctor or healthcare professional directly. So we promote them so that they're out of our face and someone else's problem, or we ignore it, or we look the other way, or we just try to. But you know, part of the thing is they did a survey a few years back of hospital employees and said, would you get care at your own hospital? And 50% of them said no. Well, why would they say that? They would say that because they know that doctor who's HODAD, hands of death and destruction. And they would, you know, when I worked across the bay at Washington Hospital in Fremont, California, and I'm fine saying this directly because I don't care. There were some of the best doctors I've ever met, and this was a community hospital, so we would rotate between Stanford and Fremont. There were some of the best doctors I ever met. Dr. Vora, I'm looking at you, buddy. Fantastic pulmonologist, great surgeons, and then there were some doctors that you would not send your worst enemy to. They were HODAD, hands of death and destruction. And on top of that, it seemed like they just didn't care. They were just churning through volume. And so you knew as a provider there who you wouldn't go to. Now, patients don't get that luxury. So we have to do a better job of policing ourselves, of having our standards held up to, and holding each other in a peer accountability, which that's the best kind of accountability. Like I was terrified of my peers at Palo Alto Medical Foundation. Like they kept me practicing at the top of my game because I didn't want to let them down or be embarrassed by something dumb that I do. So I would try to do the best I could, communicate the best I could, because I knew my colleagues were holding me accountable. And that accountability holds to this day. When I get a message, and everybody who's not a doctor, I apologize for being a little bit hierarchical here, but this is just how I'm conditioned. When I get a message from a doctor, it always pops to the top of my attention because I take it seriously as a colleague, potentially calling me out on something I've said that isn't correct, or criticizing me or complimenting me. And for some reason, I'm so conditioned to be accountable to my peers, my direct peers, that it matters to me. Now, when a nurse sends me a letter, it's the same idea, right? Because I feel like when I worked with nurses all the time on a full-time basis, like whether I taught them and they taught me, whether we had good relationships, that mattered to me. But there's something very specific about a doctor-to-doctor accountability because we've been through the exact same thing and we know what we're supposed to know. And when we let the other person down or perceive that, it's a real, for me, it's a real wake-up call to what am I doing, right? When you get in a conflict with another doctor, it's a big deal. Like it'll keep you up at night. At least me. And maybe I'm weak that way, but that's how it was. So I actually think this kind of accountability / shame is not a terrible motivator in a profession where you're able also to be vulnerable and ask questions and apologize for mistakes. That's not yet our culture. So we need to actually fix that too. Saw it on the Resident Pilot, HODAD. That's right, Denise Sims. We edited the part where I talked about HODAD out of our clip, I think. When I was training surgeons, if they didn't want to learn something I taught, the PAs first, and the surgeons were so competitive, they would then demand to learn it also. Sherry Reynolds. Sherry, every procedure I learned that's worth a damn, I learned from surgical PA because they were so good at those procedures and they were really good at teaching because they did it in a no-nonsense sort of military kind of way. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but physician assistants, PAs, and by the way, don't ever say physician's assistant because it's not correct. The PAs came out of the Army. They came out of the military. That's where the origins were. So it was a sort of a time of need thing. Really interesting etiology of where that came from. And I learned that when I spoke for the American Academy of Physician Assistants. Let's see. B. Mogoa. I need a tattoo of a handful of doctors I would never let touch my body. That's just me. But I've worked with the most amazing doctors, hands down. So B, that goes for everybody in medicine. So there were a few nurses that you knew when your patient had that nurse, you had to show up as a resident and just be vigilant, because stuff was going to be missed, was going to be done incorrectly. There was a case manager that was like that, where you just knew, oh gosh, if we get this case manager, this patient is never going to be discharged. It's just not going to happen because this person is incompetent, and no one had the courage to fire her or talk to her or mentor her or whatever. And the same goes with nursing. And then, of course, the culture of nursing is eat your young, and the culture of medicine is, pimp and degrade and berate, and none of it computes in the end. Jamie McCander, what's HODAD? Hands of Death and Destruction. It's a nickname you give a surgeon that everybody in the know knows is dangerous, but the patients, they don't know. And that's the culture of medicine. All right, guys. Do me a favor. Hit like, hit share. Tell the world about what we're doing, because it matters. Give Dyan Hes some love, Dr. Dyan Hes, for being awesome and for taking the time to talk to me. I want to thank her for that. She's doing great work in the communication space, and NBC did her a real disservice. Tonight, when you go to bed, I want you to say a little prayer for Larry Nassar, so that he goes straight to hell. And I don't know, we out. Love you guys. Peace.